Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Um, Today I'm going to talk about, uh, wearing a mask, more or less. Um, and I'm not talking about like an actual mask, just like a metaphorical mask. I started feeling like I needed to wear a mask, towards the end of my last relationship. Um, and I had this experience um, of feeling like there was a split in my self. You know, I felt like there was this intense split, um, and the way that it manifested was I created a like something of an alter ego, um, to cope with the feeling of being split, and to kind of give some backstory context for this. Um, I started reading Virginia Woolf, and I identified really heavily with Woolf. I mean, Woolf was also someone who struggled with BP, struggled with a lot of early deaths in her family when she was a child, um, and yeah, I identified with that struggle. I identified with not feeling like I could express the full range of what I felt. Um, and yeah, I identified heavily with To the Lighthouse, even though to this day I've never finished it. And Mrs. Dalloway, which is a book about a woman who's in an unhappy marriage, and she hosts a dinner party where she invites a girl she liked when she was younger and a guy she was kind of romantically involved with, and yeah, very tragic person, Virginia Woolf. There's a lot of it's kind of like her thematically. She's like tragedy of the everyday. You know, that's her whole thing. Is that everyday occurrences can be kind of tragic. Truthfully, I think she saw things through a very specific lens, um, and that lens kind of warped her perception of the world. I mean, she saw things through the lens of her family, which was very sad, and her family had a very sad home life. Her mother died when she was, I think, 13, and the whole family blamed her father for her mother's death. Um, and you know, just her father subsequently fell into like a really intense depression, and Virginia was the only one who stuck around to take care of him. And I think all of this resonated with me. I think on some level I blamed my dad for my mom's mental collapse. Um, in retrospect, that wasn't really fair, but at the time it made some sense. And so I started to develop this like persona around Virginia Woolf, and yeah, it was something that just kind of started to happen. In hindsight, I think it was really that I had so much grief in me, you know, so much sadness built up over the years of just feeling isolated and alone, and mourning the loss of my mom, and I didn't really share it with anyone, that just the ability to carry on day to day felt really heavy. Um, so around the time I broke up with my ex, I started feeling the uh, heaviness of that grief as a split in my personality. Um, and uh, there's like a concept in psychology of like the society of the self. You know that the self is like a construct consisting of many different moving parts. Um, I think the part of me that was in grief um, was so dire, was in such a bad place that to protect me from that pain, it almost split off, and was separated from the rest of my personality. Um, and I think there was also, to some degree, a decent amount of rage. Um, and I think the rage came from a place of feeling like my needs weren't met. Um, like no one was looking out for me at any point in time. I mean, I've always kind of felt like I was on my own, um, and felt like I didn't really have someone, who was guiding me through life. So I developed, kind of this coping mechanism of splitting off that piece of my personality, and I felt the split. Um, because I work with kids, and when I would have to be stern with them, I noticed that I didn't have the ability to do it without losing my cool completely. And I think other people have had this experience where you feel that accessing a specific emotion will, uh, it's like opening hot lava. Once you open the lid, you can't put it back in again. It's out of control. And I would watch the other teachers and realize that my inability to access that more stern side of myself was really a result of my trauma, of my pain, of my difficulty. And it was very difficult for me to be stern with the kids because I had and still have, so much trauma and so much pain. And I think um, when a part of you is in an immense amount of pain, um, your brain tries to protect you from it. It tries to put it somewhere else. And I would have these really intense experiences of keeping it together at work, and then immediately when I got in the car and I was alone, I would just start crying hysterically, like crying, crying, crying. Um, and I think I only really felt safe expressing my sadness when I was alone. And I think that's why I've valued my alone time so much as I've gotten older. Um, it's just, it feels much safer for me to cry when I'm not with people. And I spent a good year and a half just like deep deep in my grief and my sadness, and sometimes that's what you need, especially if you're the type of person who has repressed grief, repressed emotions, who lost someone and you buried that grief deep down. I think you reach a point in your life where the feelings are so powerful and so buried that you find when you access those emotions, you just completely lose control. Um, and this can feel something like a personality split. It can feel something like a part of you is not accessible. Um, and around this time, I started listening to a band that really helped me integrate that hurting part of myself back into my personality. The name of the band is Empire Empire, I Was the Loneliest State. So for normal people, I'm sure this band just sounds like a mousy, white guy complaining. But if you come from a background of abandonment trauma, or if you've lost someone and it was a very traumatic experience, it sounds like the grieving process made bearable. You know, their songs are very slow, they're very contemplative, and it almost like teaches you how to be present, you know, with your grief, with your loneliness. It's an amazing band. I listen to them every day. I memorized all of their songs, and it was like I was relearning how to integrate that grieving piece of myself back into my personality. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of diagnoses that come out of this personality split. You know, this split in the psyche. There's multiple personality disorder, or split personality disorder. There's borderline personality disorder, which I think comes from a slightly similar place of having gone through some childhood trauma, and as a means of coping with that unstable parent, you develop this hyper acute sense of loss, you know, like every time somebody leaves the room, it's like you're never going to see them again. Um, and I think the work of healing from those early childhood experiences is um, creating a safe place to mourn your losses. You know, I still don't think I'm so good at being stern. I think that's just not my forte. But I've definitely reintegrated the grieving side of myself back into my personality. You know, I think I have a lot more access to my pain, my sadness than I used to. And being sad is different than being depressed. You know, I mean, they often come together, but depression is just the inability to move. You know, you can't move, you're frozen, you're petrified. It's almost like it's like a living death. You know, you're alive, but you feel internally like you're shutting down, you know, and that can be a horrifying experience. And I think having access to my sadness allowed me to do things a little bit again. It gave me access to the ability to do my dishes, or the ability to sweep my floors. You know, it was like I was opening up just a little bit. Um, but I would say if you're experiencing something like that, something like a split in your personality, or you feel the compulsion to assign a different name to a way you feel, um, I think that is a resurgence of a side of yourself that you had to cut off to survive a traumatic period of your life. You know, and in terms of my trauma, I spent a lot of time, um, you know, holed up in my room playing WoW to avoid my mom, and then I spent a lot of time in high school, um, you know, extremely depressed, but not able to cry. I mean, I think that if you lose someone in a traumatic way, some people, the loss is so sudden and so painful that you almost can't cry over it. It's like crying isn't accessible. And I also had this experience again when I was with my ex. I went something like 3 years where I couldn't cry. I didn't have access to crying. Um, and you know, just being able to access the full range of your emotions is part of what makes being human bearable and an enjoyable experience. You have uh, emotions to inform you about how your internal self is reflecting on the world around you. And I think one of the things you start to experience as that split occurs is that you no longer find yourself able to be present in the moment because the uh, forcefulness of that split in you is something your cognitive mind is so aware of. I think one of the reasons trauma is so debilitating is because what it feels like is like you are no longer in the present moment. You exist almost as a ghost of who you previously were. And I think part of that experience is because you can't integrate the parts of yourself that had to be hidden from you to survive your trauma. That is the essence of trauma. Um, I mean, my ex was also a traumatized person. She was um, abused by her dad when she was younger, and she had trouble accessing some parts of herself as well. She couldn't drive. Driving was too intense an experience for her. Um, and trauma manifests itself as uh, ever-present fear in the presence of something that is not actually a threat. So you experience trauma in the present, but what you are presently afraid of is not something that is real. It's something that you've created. It's a physical manifestation of what your brain has protected you from in the past to survive your trauma. So if you're like a little child hiding from an adult who's uh, hitting you, your brain protects you from that. But the downside of that is that um, the memory gets stored as you know a physical sensation. You remember the smell of the room. You remember the feeling of being a small, cowering child. Or in my case, I sometimes have this rumination about um, my mother watching me play games and just feeling like I was tied to this computer, frozen to my computer, avoiding my mother. So it's very intense because I think part of reintegrating the split off parts of yourself is coming to terms with the way the trauma experience sits in your body, how it actually makes you feel, how you feel as you're ruminating on the trauma. I mean, I also experienced this as a trauma rumination, where I'm stuck in a room with my ex, and we're just arguing, or at least I'm imagining like us arguing, and I think trauma ruminations uh, lead to parts of yourself being inaccessible. The part of yourself that is able to imagine past the trauma into the future gets cut off. And I think that's something a lot of people experience when they're traumatized, is that you no longer have access to the future. You can only think backwards. And that's part of why I wasn't able to plan, for a long time. I mean, truthfully, I'm still having some trouble, but I'm better than I used to be. Um, and I think uh, learning to reintegrate your pain, your anger, your sadness, your happiness, learning to let all of those states coexist is very difficult for a traumatized person. Because it's literally, it feels like life or death, letting yourself get angry. I mean, I think everyone who's been through trauma has the experience of something very tiny happens and they completely lose control. I've had this experience before, and that is reactivated trauma, and if you're the type of person who has a decent amount of suppressed rage, or if you're the type of person who has a lot of repressed grief, um, come up with a daily ritual that allows you to express some of that emotion, in a place where you feel safe. So if it's grief, find some sad music and go for a walk. Sometimes it feels safer to be sad when you're moving. Um, if it's anger, come up with a time where you just get to like punch a punching bag, or go on a really intense run. Um, the process of reintegration involves creating a safe place for you to feel the full extent of that emotion. Um, and once you've experienced that for a certain period of time, you do start to feel that reintegration, the split lessons. I noticed myself that I stopped feeling the need to hide behind my pseudonym, or my feelings of having to hide. Um, so those are my thoughts. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about next time, but there will be a next time, and I hope this was helpful to someone. So I'll see you soon. Bye.